Welcome to this introduction video for this C#.NET course for engineers. In this video, we are going to look just at the why of this course, what is the objective of this course, and who this course is for. So first off, you may be wondering, with so much information on the World Wide Web and so many training resources, what's the use of another course in C#? Well, the objective of this course is specifically to tailor a course for engineers, and specifically perhaps to civil engineers such as myself, who may not be as familiar with programming concepts as, for example, electronic engineers. And so this course is specifically designed to teach C# for people in the engineering context who have not yet had any programming experience before. As I said earlier, there are many excellent and free training resources online. A good example of that is the site iamtimcorey.com. It's also got a very good YouTube channel, and you will find there a full course on C#.NET that is very, very thorough. Most of these courses, however, are aimed at those who want to become programmers, right? And so because of that, the content is structured in a way to take you through the whole .NET, Microsoft.NET ecosystem in a very, very thorough way. But if you are an engineer and you've got a certain tool in mind, or you've got a need to build something, some sort of a processing tool or a calculation tool for yourself, you don't want to understand necessarily the whole .NET ecosystem. You are basically using code as a means to an end. So your ability to code in this context as an engineer is as a means to an end and not as an end in itself. Let's look at an example. So let's say that every week you get data from 10 regions in your organization, and that the data for each region is in an Excel file with data for different zones in each region on different sheets. Now, let's say you need a tool that must on a weekly basis batch process those files in such a way that the data from each file, that is from each region, and each sheet, or that is each zone, is automatically read into a 2x2 matrix. So you're going to take all of these 10 regions, and you've got different zones in each file, and you've got to combine them into a huge 2x2 matrix. And let's assume that you then need to check that data and do some complex engineering calculations. Perhaps you're a geotechnical engineer and you do have to do some slope stability calculations, or you are a roading engineer and you have to do some calculation of equivalent standard axles, etc. And after those engineering calculations is done, you need to calculate some index values. And let's say then you have to take that data and build some sort of a predictive regression model on it. And you have to do that separately for each zone and region. And the coefficients for each of those regression models must then be imported into a database. Right, so that is a typical thing that you as an engineer may want to get done. And you have a feeling that maybe you don't have to pay a large software company to develop this tool for you. You can actually do it in-house. And that's very true and becoming much more accessible as an option now with the advent of ChatGPT. So the problem is that if you are faced with how to learn to code in a language such as C#.NET, you are looking, for example, let's say these blocks is the entire .NET ecosystem, and each block represents a different component or feature set of this language and programming framework. For example, one block may be file import and another block may be file export. You may have a database related tool set. You may have some features of the language dealing with web access and so forth. You don't need all of that. For the example that we've just mentioned, your batch processing tool, you will basically have to go in, read the file from the Excel spreadsheets in a looped manner, so you can loop at all files over all the files, and within each file loop over all of the sheets. Then you have to put the data together in an object-oriented way. You have to do some calculations. You have to do your statistical analysis, and you then have to export it to the database, and then your job is done, your objective is achieved. So as an engineer, you basically have to understand only a certain number of components initially to get this job done. So if we look at what you typically will need for the example we mentioned, your big block skills that you will need is you need to be able to parse a file in Excel, an Excel file in C#. You need to be able to formulate the data into data objects. You need to be able to perform calculations, looping over your 2x2 matrix. And you need to use statistic libraries such as ML.NET. And finally, you need to have some skills in interacting with a database using C#.NET. So if you are going to ChatGPT, for example, and you give it the entire problem, you are going to be lost. The ChatGPT will also be lost. However, if you give ChatGPT an objective to say, show me how to read data from an Excel file, and then it can show you how to do that, and then you tell it, show me how to loop over a few files and do this, it will show you a C# class that contains all of that code. And if you, as an engineer, look through the code, you will be able, even if you don't really understand C#, you will be able to see how that program works. But your context, the big context of what do you do with that class now? You've got a piece of code. Where do you plug it in? Does it go into a notepad, or where do you put it in? So it's these big block elements that are really important for you, unless you already understand this whole ecosystem. But if you just want to move through these blocks in this way to get your objective achieved, then it's important for you not so much to understand the details of what goes inside each of these blocks, because there's so many resources to answer those questions for you. ChatGPT is one of the key ones. But you have to know where do these answers that you can get from ChatGPT, where do you plug them in? And how do you link this together? And how do you give this to your colleagues so that they can also run this batch processing tool? So that's what we're trying to achieve in this course, is to make you as an engineer at least a little bit more familiar with these big picture concepts. So the concepts that we are talking about that we will be looking at is, first of all, understanding Visual Studio and how to use your code inside Visual Studio. And I want to make sure you understand at the outset that Visual Studio is not the same as Visual Studio Code, right? I think it's very unfortunate that Microsoft made both of these projects and they gave them such a similar name. So be very sure, if you're going to do some sort of a search on Google or on ChatGPT, put in Visual Studio and make sure it's not giving you answers for Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio is more of a heavyweight coding tool, and Visual Studio Code is more for text editing and so on, and not so much for compiling code, etc. It can do that, but Visual Studio will be our tool of choice in this course. Then the other big picture concepts that we are going to discuss is, how does a project work in Visual Studio? So and how does a solution work? And these are important concepts to get right from the beginning in Visual Studio. How do you reference one project to another so that they can talk to each other? Then we will also discuss code block concepts. In other words, things like how is your code packaged and how do these blocks fit one into another. So we'll spend time and we'll have separate videos dealing, for example, with .NET C# classes, namespaces, variable scopes, and things like that. Then we will also talk about basic C# syntax, how to write a for loop, if statements, and things like that. However, I want to warn you up front that we're not going to delve into that in too much detail, because it is so easy now to ask ChatGPT, show me how to do a for loop in C#.NET. And in any event, you're not going to remember it by watching one video. You're going to have to repeat it over and over and over again, and the answers are always accessible on ChatGPT. And so we will just cover some of the basics. Then we will talk about object-oriented programming, or OOP concepts. So this is quite important, and if you are using this course to help you to be able to write a domain model function for Juno Cassandra, which is our our deterioration modeling framework, then these object-oriented programming concepts such as inheritance and interfacing is quite important. So we'll deal with that as well. Very important, we're going to show you and talk a lot about debugging, how to debug your code in Visual Studio. That is a very, very powerful learning tool as well, and we'll talk about that. And then we will cover how to use ChatGPT optimally, because it is a game-changing tool in this day and age. And like I say, you no longer need to be an expert in the C# coding language. As long as you know what to do with the code, you can always go and get the answer. And of course, you will have to test it. ChatGPT will almost certainly make mistakes, but you will, through your testing, uncover those mistakes, and you will over time find out how to correct it, or ask ChatGPT to correct it for you. And then finally, we'll also talk about how do you actually distribute your program to users. And I'm thinking here that if you are a civil engineer or some engineer working in a corporate setup, you are probably going to be writing programs that you will distribute to your colleagues first of all, or you'll be using it for yourself. I am a civil engineer with a PhD in road engineering, pavement engineering specifically, and I have written or been instrumental in writing 2 different .NET programs, which started small and is now used worldwide. And they are now maintained by a professional software management firm in which I'm also involved. But I was able, just as a civil engineer, teaching myself to write these 2 commercial products. And I think anyone can really do it. So the teaching approach, or what to expect from this course, I will always try to put the principles, the concepts, and specifically the big picture concepts first. That's what we are going to start with. And then we will be looking at some relatively practical case studies or examples to just illustrate how these principles actually work in practice. We'll have lots of hands-on examples, small examples. And I'm quite sure that if you commit to pay close attention to the lectures, really give your close attention, specifically those dealing with the principles or the big picture concepts. And then secondly, if you follow along the examples by actually typing out the code, right? So I've often seen people ask in the comments, can't you put the code on GitHub so that I can download it? And for me, if you are learning something, that is pretty pointless, because the whole objective is to try and follow along and learn as you go. And then finally, I also think you'll get much more out of the course if you do the suggested homework or further study elements, which will always show at the end of each lecture or each video. May not be in every video, but in most of them. If you actually do that before you watch the next video, you will get a lot of benefit out of this course. So in the next video, we are going to look at project types in Visual Studio, how to create references between projects, and we'll do a very small hands-on example just to illustrate and put those principles in practice. Some homework, things that you have to do before the next video, is to first of all watch at least 2 videos with the general title such as Getting Started with Visual Studio. I recommend you go to the video which is on the channel Height Above Sea Level. You can see here Height Above Sea Level, and they've got a video, Visual Studio for Beginners 2022 and beyond. I found that's a really good video. It's not very long, but it's quite good, and you'll find on that channel also some other good resources related to C#. And then the next part of your homework is to actually use this video to install Visual Studio on your computer if you haven't yet done so. And I just want to emphasize again, Visual Studio is not the same as Visual Studio Code. We need Visual Studio and not Visual Studio Code. So that's it for this introductory video. If you are interested in following along with this course, you are most welcome to do so, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.